So during recess week, I gave myself a break and travelled 250 kilometers to see the world's busiest maritime trade route, the Strait of Malacca. Good morning, Professor. In this video, we'll be covering the background and info on the Strait of Malacca, the importance of the strait to different nations, how the strait is viewed via different political theories, how it influences policy making, and examining a case study on the strait. The Strait of Malacca is pivotal, as it connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. It is also approximately 900 kilometers long, where about 60% of the global maritime trade passes through. It's the busiest strait in the world, and given its strategic location, is nicknamed the Maritime Silk Road's throat. Now, let's take a look at its importance to nations, starting with China. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and 80% of its oil imports flows through the strait. It is also the shortest sea route, connecting them to their major trade partners in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, and thus makes maritime trade cost and time efficient. In 2003, Chinese President Hu Jintao coined the term the Malacca Dilemma, which points to China's vulnerability to a potential blockade or disruption of the strait, given its heavy reliance. Let's now take a look at the strait's importance to the US. The strait connects the US Navy to its bases in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. It is also a strategic point of communication for the US to project its influence and ideology, such as the enforcement of freedom of navigation. Like China, it also connects them to their trade partners, and given China's heavy reliance, the US can turn the strait into a leverage point in the event of tensions. Well, how about other nations? Neighbouring countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia collect taxes when ships dock at our ports for loading or refueling, which contributes to their economic growth and revenue. Under Article 47 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS for short, the Strait of Malacca is classified as a strait used for international navigation. However, in Part 5 of UNCLOS, coastal states are granted rights to explore and exploit natural resources in their exclusive economic zones, or EEZ for short, which extends up to 200 nautical miles from where the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. Thus, neighbouring countries have EEZs which extend into the strait and have jurisdiction over the construction of infrastructure, the conduct of marine scientific research, as well as the responsibility to protect and preserve the marine environment in the region. Now let's analyse the Strait of Malacca using the political theories of realism and liberalism, where I'll give a rough overview and theories' influence on policy making of different nations regarding the strait. Starting off with realism, which assumes that the world is anarchic, with no global policeman or authority to enforce law and order. This implies that states are solely responsible for their own survival and cannot depend on or trust the intentions of another nation. States are also the main actors in international politics and foreign policy and are highly rational. They ensure their own survival by fulfilling their self-interests, which can range from economic, political, or the issue on sovereignty. States also have an inherent desire to expand their power so that their needs are met and that they can better guarantee their own survival. A realist would therefore view the Strait of Malacca as a vital sea lane due to its strategic location, where individual control over the strait is essential for economic activity and growth. Since realists are concerned with hard power, whoever dominates the strait arguably has got more hard power and can use the strait strategically to enhance their self-interests. Any blockade or disruption is highly detrimental to the overall survival of the state, which was highlighted in the Chinese coined term the Malacca Dilemma earlier. To realists, power is also a zero-sum game, and thus there is a need to contain other states in the region to prevent them from gaining relative power to one's own state and dominating over the region. Assessing realism's impact on policy making for China, this has caused them to be distrustful of the US, as they have the option of blockading the strait anytime. To safeguard its interests, China has to assert dominance over the region and reduce its dependence, evident from their initial plan to incorporate Malacca as part of their Belt Road initiative, and the building of the China-Myanmar oil and gas pipelines to diversify their oil imports. For the US, they capitalized on this importance by having a strong military presence in the region to minimize China's influence. They also engage in power balancing to match China's level of presence and activity in the region, so as to ensure that navigation isn't monopolized by them. For other nations, the strait lies within their EEZs. They prioritize their own sovereignty and hence reject any foreign military presence without their consent, which we will explore later. They also exploit the state for their own economic gain and survival. Now, for liberalism, which also assumes an anarchic world with no authority to enforce law globally. However, liberalism believes that states are capable of cooperating for the greater good and that they are not inherently selfish. Interdependence between states help to reduce conflict and the possibility of war, with non-state actors like global institutions pivotal in promoting peace and cooperation. For liberalists, they also recognize the importance of the strait for global trade. However, they believe in cooperation between states and cooperating in terms of security is beneficial for all parties utilizing the strait. The connection to global ports also promotes the idea of economic interdependence and peace among states. Peaceful navigation of the strait can come via international institutions and treaties, which help to overcome the problem of anarchy and power politics. Liberalism has influenced governments to largely agree to a rules-based maritime order under UNCLOS and led to the formation of international maritime organizations like the IMO. The Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, or RECAP in short, consists of 21 nations, including ASEAN, which pledged to work towards collective security and the combating of piracy in the strait. The decision to have a strong US presence to uphold freedom of navigation also mean that countries can stand to enjoy absolute gains. Let's now delve into a case study on the problem of piracy in the strait from the 1990s to 2000s. From 1990s to 2000s, the Strait of Malacca became one of the world's most dangerous waterways, and by 2004, there were over 150 reported piracy attacks. So in 2004, the US proposed the Regional Maritime Security Initiative, or RMSI, offering to patrol the strait against piracy to help secure it, which it viewed as vulnerable to attacks and piracy that could disrupt global trade. However, Malaysia and Indonesia firmly rejected this and perceived the offer differently. As a result, the US plan was not adopted. However, the Malacca Strait Patrols were set up in 2004, which involved Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore to combat piracy. Each state patrols its own waters, but they coordinate through intelligence sharing, and each nation also strengthened its navy and coast guard, conducted independent patrols, and rejected foreign interference in the strait. Realists will argue that the US's offer was the opportunity to expand their dominance and influence in the region. The rejection of US offer by neighboring states results from the infringement of their sovereignty as granted by the EEZ, which is a cornerstone for survival. They also fear that the US presence will potentially weaken their own control and influence over the area, and that self-reliance is the correct approach to counter the piracy issue, evident from the strengthening of their own navies and coast guards. However, liberalists will argue that the US merely wanted to protect the regional peace and stability so that all countries benefit. The issue of piracy also presents an opportunity for cooperation for the collective good, as seen from the formation of the MSP. The rejection of US offer can be attributed to the fact that Malaysia and Indonesia prefer to turn to regional institutions like ASEAN to collectively solve the issue, rather than accepting US-led intervention. In conclusion, we have covered the following points, including analysing a case study on piracy, which gives us a complete overview on the Strait of Malacca. Thank you.